We're looking here at the creature that ate Sheboygan. One of the great things about being in this hobby is the ability to play with the original components of a game. And it's almost like, for example, being able to read Virginia Woolf and actually get your hands on an original copy of one of her books, which, of course, it could potentially be possible to do. It wouldn't be possible for me to do that, but it could be possible for someone. But for those of us in the game hobby, it is possible to get these original components, and it really adds a lot to the experience, I think. Here we're looking at, this is the boxed version of this game, and it's got the copyright of 1979. It's an SPI game that was originally released not in this box. And I traded for this and noticed here on the side that actually this looks like it came from maybe a British subsidiary of SPI, or I'm not really sure. So maybe somebody that knows more about this can comment and let me know what this means, what this is. The box itself, the bottom of the box is just white, and they take the opportunity to explain the game on the side of the box, and this is duplicates what comes in the rules. From the murky depths of Lake Michigan, the creature rose, tossing its massive head, etc. The Creature That Ate Sheboygan is a fast-moving game that pits man against monster. Army, police, firemen, and citizens together with several monster types are all portrayed. And we have the game components listed here. There is an accompanying article that came out, I guess, around the same time of the game that proclaimed pretty excitedly that this is SPI's move into, I think, what they hope to be more mainstream gaming. Of course, if you know the history here, 1979 wasn't too far, wasn't too much after that SPI was no longer. So that actually did not materialize. There are 100 counters in the game. We're not going to go through all of them. I got a really great copy of the game, I have to say. First of all, the color on the counters is really rich and very evocative. That really is quite clearly a police car. And police car to remind us of that. We have the choice of monsters. We'll get into this a little bit. I'm not going to do too much of a rules overview because the game's pretty simple in terms of rules, but one of the things you get to do is build your monster. This is a two-player game, I should say. I'm going to be playing it, basically creating some pretty rudimentary AI for the monster, which will make thematic sense because a monster lumbering through a town, as will happen here, doesn't really need a lot of complex mechanisms to figure it out. You get some not blank, but you get counters with just silhouettes and no values on them because you're going to be purchasing the values of your monster. I tend to play with this because I like the Loch Ness theme, but there are a bunch here, and I'll show you also in the rules. There are, I guess this goes maybe that way, some big spider situation there, and something that's pretty hulky, and something, I guess this is a flying something. What's sort of neat in the rules is these historical notes in the back here that tell us, for reference, here are the appropriate statistics for some of the great monsters of, quote, film history. Strengths are given in order of attack, defense, destruction, and movement, followed by special abilities. So you've got, if you want to try to play a historical monster, Tyrannosaurus or a giant caterpillar, the giant moth, flying turtle, three-headed monster, etc., you have some built-in abilities here. And of course you can create your own, and that's part of the fun of the game. The rule set is pretty light. It's just these 4 pages that I'm showing you here, including the tables with terrain effects, We have a building destruction results table and a CRT, pretty basic. This is a not too complicated a game. Your sequence of play is pretty simple. We start with the monster player turn, and the monster will then move and the monster will attack. And then the human player is going to move and attack. And in an advanced scenario, you have the fire phase with firemen and fireboats putting out fires. We will be using that rule when we do our playthrough here. The map is a map of downtown Sheboygan. It's divided into boxes. There's no hexes here. Let's see, I'm not really showing you the full map here, but this is what we have. So you've got some basic terrain here that they're pre-placed civilians on the map. And there are bridges, tunnels, there's a river that we saw on the other side, the streets, obviously. We have a park down here, and we have basically two levels of buildings. We have low levels and low buildings and high buildings. The wind comes into issue when you get into the fire situation and how fire can spread. And here's back again showing you the river here, and there are some fireboats that can be placed on the river, which we will be doing. And the overall map is pretty small, as you can see. I guess it's 11 by 17 or thereabouts. The information on the units is pretty basic. We have a combat strength on the left, we've got the movement allowance on the right, and we have the range in the middle. And we have something like, here's a civilian. If it has no range, it will have a dot there. And if it has no combat, if it is in essence only able to defend itself, its combat strength will be parenthetically indicated as it is here. For the human side, what I'm calling our side, we have police, fire, I mentioned the fireboat, and we also have air units. We have a helicopter here. And we've also playing with the National Guard. So we've got infantry, tanks, and artillery. And then we have these populous characters that are placed on the map at the beginning. These monsters that I showed you earlier, you're really only playing with one of them, but you have a choice of the iconography to use. And there are capabilities that the monsters can potentially have, like casting webs and making fire. And of course, we have rubble markers, because basically what's happening is this monster is going to be stomping through downtown Sheboygan, as we see here, and destroying things. And we're going to be indicating all that with the rubble markers. And things quickly do turn to rubble, I can say that. If you go on any discussion forums online about games, you know that one of the things people are always concerned about is the replayability of the game. And in this game, because one of the main aspects of it is that you're building your monster. So the monster player gets to choose from among a variety of different abilities, of special abilities for their monster. And each, well, before we get to that, let's just look at these scenarios. So in essence, the setup for the scenario is really the same, but the difference in the scenarios, and there are 4 of them here, are how many asset points the person who plays the monster has and the person who plays the humans have to purchase units, and in the case of the monster, to purchase various abilities. And so the more complicated scenarios grant more strength points to either side to become, more complicated and greater. So in my notes here, I'm going to be playing or demonstrating some scenes from the Advanced Scenario B. And the Advanced Scenario B gives the human player has 60 initial strength points and the monster has 40. And we are going to construct our monster first. Now, of course, this is a 2-player game, and it really is designed as such, and you're supposed to be, as the monster player, creating your monster in secret. And one of the neat little aspects of the game is that until you come on the scene with your monster and start to use your special abilities, the other side doesn't know actually what your special abilities are. So they won't know that you have, for example, fire breathing, or can throw lightning, or can spin a web, or jump over buildings until you actually do it. And then they have to kind of scramble and respond accordingly. Now, of course, in playing both sides, that's clearly not the way you're going to do it. And also, there are some of the abilities that don't really make sense to use. For example, there's something called mind control that the monster player could have, where they basically can take over any human units. And it doesn't really make sense to have that ability when you are playing by yourself. What you're instructed to do is to take the set number of points you're given, and for this scenario, it is a total of 40, and distribute them among your certain variables, your attack, your defense, something called a building destruction modifier, and your movement, and then whatever you have left over you can use to purchase special abilities. The rules say that you have to save at least 1/4 of your allotment of points, so in this case it would be 10, although I actually spent 19, on the special ability. So you can't simply just throw everything into your attack and defense, for example. The other thing that is neat about the rules, and I have this noted here, is that when the monster takes damage, you get to choose to allocate the damage or the wound to one of your 4 variables. So you don't simply, for example, your defense, you don't simply have to take damage to your defense. You can decide to allocate it to your attack or your building destruction or limit your movement. Now, that being said, once your defense does go down to 0, if you're the monster player, you have lost the game. So you have to sort of maintain that. My choice for the allotment is typically to pour a lot more of my resource points, in this case almost half, into the special abilities than I do to basic attack, defense, building destruction, and movement. I don't really know why. That's just, I like the special abilities. I like to purchase them. In this case, what I've chosen, as I often do, is fire breathing. Now, this is expensive. Fire breathing costs 8, but it is a pretty effective, it's a pretty effective special ability, and you'll see as we go that quickly things can turn to fire and buildings can be turned to rubble through continual fire, and we'll explain how that works when we get into the example of the game. I've chosen lightning, also lightning throwing. This, it costs 6 points, and it lets the monster attack it up to a range of 3 instead of only the adjacent targets. And I think that's pretty significant because you're not going to suffer combat damage if you're attacking something that's non-adjacent. So basically you're protected by using that. Now that costs 6, so that's pretty expensive. And I also chose web spinning, which means that to sacrifice your movement for 1 turn, so in other words, you're not allowed to move, you then can place a web marker in an adjacent box, and then that particular box becomes impassable to all the other units, not to you, but to all the other units for the rest of the game. And if there were human units trapped in a box, they have to spend their movement points to cut their way out. And while they're doing this, they cannot attack the monster. So I like the web, even though it costs 5, and those are my 19 points, and then I've allocated my attack, defense, building destruction, and movement, as you see here. Now, on the human side of things for this scenario, we have up to, I think it was 60. Let me just double check. I spent 59. Excuse me. Yes, I have 60 strength points to use, and I have purchased, the values of the purchase points are the same as the attack value on the counter, which I'm not showing you right now. But so, for example, each police costs 1. The helicopters cost 1 as well. Let me just pull them out here to remind you of the different functionality of them. So, for example, here is a helicopter counter, and we can see clearly. I'll show you a little more clearly. Actually, here we go. So just as a reminder, though I went through it before, the number on the lower left is the combat strength, and that is also the purchase price. The number in the middle is the range, and the number on the lower right is the movement allowance for this unit. So I've got 4 helicopters. I've chosen 6 police, and we'll just look at the police here. They've got a movement of 3. 4 tanks. Now, I feel that the tanks are probably the most valuable unit that you can have because they have a large combat strength. Let me find one here. Excuse me. Here's their combat strength right here. They have a large combat strength, they're pretty fast, and they have a 2-block attack range, so they can be sort of out of direct consequence of the monster's attack to them. So I chose 4 tanks. They do cost 4 each. Excuse me, they cost 6 each. So I took 4 of them, and we have artillery and we've got infantry. I took 2 artillery, and the artillery has a strength of 5 and a range of 6. So that's pretty good because they can stay out of the reach of a lot of things. They don't have the highest movement allowance. They have a movement allowance of 2. Let's see if I can find one here to show you. Here we go. Here's the artillery right there. And so you need to sort of figure out where you're going to have them when you start out. But again, it's a little random because you don't know where that monster is coming in. And then I took some infantry here at the end. They don't do too much, but they have a decent movement allowance of 3. They cost 3 each, and I ended up taking 5 of them. So I spent my 59 points that way. You can this is the mix that you have. There are fireboats that will come in. They are free of charge. Here's the firemen right there, and there are fireboats also. Here's the fireboat that comes in, and this comes in once, if the monster has flame, which we know it does, this will come in once a fire is started, and the boats will come in on the river, and the firemen can come in anywhere, again, free of charge, and you will use them to attempt to put out the fire. So you can sort of count on having these, but you don't need to spend any of your strength points to obtain them. So this is what I'm going to be playing with, and again, the real variability here is with the monster, because I've decided, as I said, to go with the classic, and we'll be using the Godzilla counter right here. One of the monster abilities that I use when I play by myself, but I'm not going to use here, is flying. And the reason that I'm not going to use it here is I know I'll just get confused. If you watch my videos, you know that I too tend to get a little confused when I'm filming, even if it's a pretty simple game that I've played a bunch, because it's hard to be, for me anyway, to be filming and thinking and following the rules and all of that. And flying, I know I would totally mess up, but it's kind of cool because it means that the monster can sort of pass through any box that it wants, and it can go through fire and all sorts of things like that. So I kind of like the 3-dimensionality of that, and when I play by myself I do purchase that for a cost of 8, but I haven't done so here. So this is the setup with my Godzilla monster, and we're going to be fighting here with our police, helicopter, tanks, and artillery. One last point I want to make before getting into part of the demonstration is just a question that I have always had about the rules here. There is this mention under here, 5.2, stacking. Only one monster may ever be present in a box. Now, as far as I know, that's the only reference in the rules to the fact that there could potentially be more than one monster that you have constructed, unless I'm really missing something. The rest of the rules refer to a single monster in terms of the monster player, as it is referred to, or the monster, singular. It's ambiguous, I suppose, because there is not an explicit restriction that you must only construct one monster, and you just have a number of points. So you could allocate those points, I think, potentially to 2 monsters, yet nowhere else in the rules, except for this mention here, where of only one monster may ever be present in a box, is there the sense that you could potentially create 2 monsters. I've never been able to figure that out, and I've never actually played with more than one monster created or one monster character, but that, I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else does, but I only ever play with one. I'm not clear that you couldn't actually play with more than one if you just spent the allocated number of points. It had been my intention to play through about half a game and then come in mid-game and show you what was going on and explain some of the mechanics and things like that. But as it goes, I just have played now. I just started the game, basically, and I played literally half the monster turn. Well, I guess I played the whole monster turn. And I already want to talk about some things, so I'm just going to do that, and then we'll see what I do for the rest of the video. I don't know yet. So basically what happens is you are placing first, the monster is here and has ultimately come in on the south side of the map. You can't see it just a little bit down here, but has come in lumbering over the bridge. But before this happened, what you are doing is you are placing your units. It's the quiet downtown of Sheboygan, but there are some rumblings in the distance. So the police are out and scattered. We have our populace markers here that these count as victory points for the monster character, and they're pre-indicated on the map, so you know where they start out. They've got a low movement value, but they can be picked up by the police. So I've spread out my police units around here, my helicopters. Well, you can't see one down there. There's one here. This isn't actually on the high building, but it is circling the high building here. And I've got my tanks, kind of keeping my tanks in the middle of the town, because when you place your units, you don't know where the monster is going to be. So I like to keep my tanks sort of spread out, but in the middle of the town. They've got a movement value of 5, so they can sort of get places relatively quickly, and they also have a range of 6, so I want them to be able to move around. I don't yet have any fire units because fire hasn't started yet. Well, fire actually has started now, but when I originally started, it hasn't. The next thing that happens is once your units are down, the monster is going to come in. Now, in a two-player game, obviously, the person just decides where the monster is coming in. When you're playing solo, you just roll either a d4 or you roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I actually use, just as a little homage to the original intent of the game, when it comes with these counters, I just pull out 4 and randomize them in my hand and secretly pull out 1. When I did that, the monster came in from the south, and so he's going to be lumbering. Well, he did lumber across the bridge, used his potential for fire breathing to create fires, which he successfully did on these well, they're not really hexes, areas next to the bridge. So we have the potential for this fire spreading to this building here. This one really can't spread because it's not going to spread across the water. But with fire, what happens is there is a timing mechanism, and I will show you this up close. When you place the fire marker, as I've done, you place it with the number 1 to the south. The south in this case is down below. And each turn that the fire remains, you're rotating this marker around. And by the time you get to the end where the R is facing south, what that means is that I'm going to just call it a hex, or that area has turned to rubble, and you place a rubble marker there to indicate that. And at the end, this is a victory point driven game. There are victory points that are given to the monster for the rubble hexes, and let's see, what are they? So we'll go over this. The monster is going to get 5 victory points for each populace unit eliminated. So this is why you have some incentive to pick up your populace here, maybe keep them with a policeman and move them around, not just let them sit there and be eliminated by the monster, because they basically have no attack value. They just have that 1 in parentheses. That's their minimal defense. So 5 VPs for the humans or the populace units that the monster gets. They get as many VPs for eliminating each unit as the combat strength. So for example, they would get 1 on the police units. They would get a lot, 6 on the tanks for elimination and such. They also get three VPs for low building destruction boxes, 5 for high building, and 5 for bridge. And we can see here that what the monster did was he came across this bridge, and per the rules, he can stop up to 3 times during his turn and attempt to set fires, which he did successfully. And then at the end, what he was able to do was attempt to destroy this bridge, and he was successful in doing that. You may recall that you designate a building destruction amount to your monster. I gave him a building destruction amount of 4. There is a building destruction, basically like a building destruction CRT here, where you take the ratio of your strength, which in this case mine was 4, to the indicated destruction strength of the particular hex that you're in, and the bridge hex had 1 of 2. So 4 to 2, we were 2 to 1, and unluckily, well, either luckily or unfortunately, depending on which side we're thinking about, we rolled a 6. So that is a D value there, you can see down on the chart, and we did reduce this part of the bridge to rubble. And the last thing that we did on our turn, we had our infantry here initially placed, sort of potentially defending this bridge, and the monster, when he was adjacent, he really is here. I just have this to show you that marker. He did some basic attack on this infantry, and the result was we had to retreat 1, so we moved here, and that was the end of our turn. Now the phase of the first turn, the monster phase. The next part, what happens in the sequence of play, is that it is the human player turn, or in this case us moving our units, and the first thing we do is exactly that. We need to move our units. Now you may think, well, I'm just going to converge everything here and start to move everything in, but remember, we have on the monster's capability, he's got a movement value of 3. He also has the fire breathing capability, which has the range of, let's see, remind myself of what that range is. Oh, well, it's not a range. The fire breathing is just around him, but he does have, it's the lightning that has the range. So he's got his lightning capacity, which has a range of 3. So we need to bear that in mind and not just converge everything here. One strategy, I think, in the game is to get multiple units together to join in an attack, but you can't just leave things unexposed because the monster is going to move around. Now, this is where there's a question in my mind, and I've played different ways about how to actually do this solitaire. There's really 2 strategies that I've tried in various games that I've played. One is to simply try as best as possible to quote unquote be the monster player, assess the situation, and maybe go back to your memory bank of monster films to figure out, well, what would a monster do in this situation? What would be the most dramatic thing? Or is he near a tall building? Is he going to attempt to knock that one over? And basically do that. The other thing that you can do, and I've also done this, is to create a very simple, say, deck of cards or list with against numbers that you can roll on that give the various possibilities of something that he could do. So to create that list, you would, for example, include, well, he might be attacking the furthest unit that is within his range. He could be attacking that which would give him the most VPs, things of that nature. And then you could just draw that to dictate what the monster player would do. So those are really 2 different ways of playing this game with a simple AI. Right now, for this playthrough, I'm not going to show you the whole playthrough because I don't think it would be that interesting, but when I play the game and dip back in to show you what has happened, I'll let you know that what I have done is I'm just going to basically play what I'm calling the movie version of it, looking at the situation and doing what he would have done. So of course the monster lumbering across this bridge is going to try to set fire to everything. He's going to make a big show initially, and of course he's going to try to make a destruction and attack, and that's basically what happened. The men, in terms of the humans, what are they going to do? Well, I'm going to have some of them converging. I'm going to be moving some of them. These tanks in particular here are pretty well situated, and this is why I've done that, to come in and move along this road here. They've got their movement allowance of 5, so you can't move diagonally, really, but this is, if you can see that there, that counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could get this guy. I could actually get this tank right here, which I probably will do. And I'm going to continue on, though. For example, my police unit here. My idea was, in placing them as I did, that they might come and pick up these civilians. So he's got this movement value of 3. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to be moving this tank anyway. So he's going to pick up this guy ultimately. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll start moving these things around and come back to the game a little bit later and discuss what has happened. Actually, I do want to come back and just show you something. I've got some helicopter units, and helicopter units are great because they have this range of 7, and they only pay 1 movement per terrain, no matter what, obviously, they're flying. So they've got the movement range of 7, they've got the combat range of 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, yeah. So I can fly this guy in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, you got to just kind of, I guess that's going to be 6, 7. We're instructed, now this is a fire, but it's a helicopter, so, you know. The rules say there's no quote-unquote diagonal movement, but of course the hexes are, well, the boxes are, you really have to use a little interpretation. Obviously this is, you know, there's some fluidity here. Anyway, I'm going to fly this copter in, and I'm going to say that this is 2 away. Now, I've always played that this is, even though there's not a line here, this bridge, for example, is 3 boxes long, as opposed to 1, as is indicated. So I'm getting that helicopter within range. I've moved, now this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. Yeah, I can fly this one in too. I'm certainly going to do that. Fly that one in, and I already started moving. I picked up this civilian here. Now I'm a little confused because I'm filming. I think I already moved that, maybe not. This guy, haven't moved that. Now, you don't have to move everything every turn, and sometimes it's best not to because you just don't know what's going to happen. Let's see. That might be all I decide to do right now. You know, this is kind of out of the way. It only has a movement value of 2. That's an issue with this artillery. I think I will just slowly put this over here, perhaps. And yeah, so we're converging a little bit here around the bridge area. We've got 2 copters here. I move my tank down here, and, you know, it looks like the monster might be trapped, but obviously this is a horror movie, so it's not going to be that easy. Before I get to how combat happens, I skipped something that's supposed to happen at the beginning of my turn, so I'm going to show you here. Once there is a fire started, as there is here, you get for free either 1 fireboat and 3 firemen, or you could take 4 firemen. And actually, I think I was going to take the boat, but I think I'm going to take the 4 firemen instead. I'm going to take the 4 firemen, and you are allowed to place them anywhere you want. I've made the decision, because of the way this happened, the most this can spread is to where you see here, this building to the right. Well, I guess it could spread to the rest of the bridge, but well, I suppose it could start to spread off the bridge. Nevertheless, I think I'm making the decision to sort of forget this for now. I can place my firemen anywhere I want, and because I've played this game before and because I know what happens, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time right now placing these guys here, which is basically far away from anything. I suppose I could put one of them here, but I'm going to just place these firemen around the map because they have a value of 3 for movement, but I'm going to just keep them here. So I had forgotten to do that. So now I've done that. I'm still not going to take that fireboat. What is going to happen, I'm just going to show you how combat works. With our combat, so we've got our two helicopters here, and we have our tank. Our tank has the best, by far, the best combat strength at 6. Our helicopters have 1 each. And this fellow, unfortunately, I don't think I moved him. I can move him onto here so he could join the attack. So I'm going to do that because I hadn't moved him before. He had been moved in the last turn. With combat, you have the opportunity to conduct individual combats, to put your forces together, or some combination thereof. So what I'm going to choose to do, and the monster uses the defense value that he has at any current time in each combat. So what I'm going to choose to do is to put together this tank and artillery combat as one attack, and then I'm going to put together these helicopters. Unfortunately, they only have a combat value of 1, so they're really not very strong. I could just put everything together in one attack, but I think I'm not going to do that. Remember, our monster here, the way that I have built him, he's got a defense value of 6. Well, 2 to 6, if we just do those helicopters, that's really not very good. Looking at we don't need to look at the table to know that, but that's not going to be good, a 1 to 3 ratio. We'll probably just do one big attack. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 as against 6. I guess we could do that. But you know what? We're not quite getting 2 to 1 because I think we have to round down. I got to check the rules on that. All right, indeed, that wouldn't really help us out. But I realize I still have this tank here that I had not yet moved. I was going to keep it up there, but if I move it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this can join in the attack. So we've got 6 and 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17 as against 6. That doesn't quite get us to a 3 to 1, but at least we'll be at 2 to 1. So we'll look at the CRT here, and we'll roll a d6, and we'll see what we get. So let's do this, and hope. We got a 5, which is going to 2 to 1, a 5. That's going to be a retreat. So the defender is going to have to retreat 1. Let's see, monster must retreat 1 box. If unable to do so, it suffers 1 damage point. Well, unfortunately, it can retreat. So for all of that, we've just backed the monster up onto the bridge. He's between 2 burning hexes, and we've got our firemen there who might attempt to put something out, and we've got our helicopter circling. And despite all of this, it's probably going to be doomed for us eventually. But for the time being, we've got our monster sort of boxed in here. There's rubble, and I think that's going to affect his terrain, his movement. It's going to increase his movement. It's going to cost 2 to get in there, so he's not going to be able to go that far. Well, you know what? That's pretty good so far. This is where things stand, and we are just now finishing. Well, we haven't even finished the first turn, so let me just bring you to the end of that. What happens now is the fire phase of the game. In the fire phase, the firemen attempt to put out fires, and then we determine which way the wind is blowing and whether the fires have spread. All right, this is a rule I always mess up because it seems a little counterintuitive. The fireman will automatically put out a blaze if he is in that hex. Now, I didn't place this, so I could have just placed this guy right here when I brought him in, and that would have been that. I didn't do that, so be that as it may, I'll just leave it. So we're not actually able to put out any fire, but that is how that works, and you'll see if there is, what you're basically trying to do is chase down the fires and end your movement in a fire hex and be able to put it out. So that could have potentially happened had I placed this guy appropriately. but I didn't, so we'll just leave it as it is. The next thing that happens in the fire phase is you roll for wind, and there is a wind marker here to indicate which way the wind is blowing. I'm going to roll my d6, and it's a 4, so the wind is blowing to the west for right now. And then what you need to do is to roll for each hex, each box that has a fire marker in it. You are rolling to see whether that fire spreads. And you're going to, let's see, I think it's on a 5 or a 6. Oh, on a roll of 6, the fire spreads and the flames marker is placed in the affected box. So we will do that, and if you're, all right, so we're rolling here, and we rolled a 5, so that did not spread. We're going to now roll for this one. We got a 1, that did not spread. So neither of these spread. How does the wind work? Well, the wind isn't going to affect anything right here because we don't have more than, we haven't had a fire spreading yet. But the way it would work is that if we had, let's just say, for example, this was the case. This firebox would be downwind of this fire because the wind is blowing to the west. So what that means is when we rolled for this box, we would need to add 1 to our d6 roll. In this case, we had rolled a 1. It still wouldn't have spread further, but you could see obviously how that could potentially deleteriously impact this. But that's not going to come into play because we don't have fires, any adjacency with the fires yet. But that is how fire spread, and that brings us to the conclusion of the entire first turn. It's so tempting with this game to just want to continue on and tell you everything I'm doing, and I can't do that because I noticed the video is already pretty long. But I just want to point out where not much has happened, but I want to point out something about the game and sort of trying to play it solo. What I did here was the monster moved into this rubble hex, and that cost him his 2 movement points. He is now going to, he's got his attack value of 8. He's going to choose, this has a defense value of 3, so with his 2-to-1 odds, he's going to attempt an attack on this infantry, and so I'm going to do that. But why I'm coming back to talk to you is just a little bit about playing this kind of game solo and some of the reasons why it's hard for me to play games solo, even sort of fun, light games like this. The monster has the web spinning capacity, and the web spinning capacity means that, well, first of all, you get to use these cool web counters, so that's cool. But what you need to do to spin a web is to sacrifice your movement for that turn, and then you can place a web marker in any one of 2 adjacent boxes to where you are, and that box is going to become impassable to all units. You can also trap units in a webbed box, and they have to spend 2 full human movement phases to cut their way out. And while they're doing this, they can't attack the monster. And that web marker is not going to be removed until that happens unless fire spreads to that box. So one of the things to decide here is on both sides. Obviously, the monster with this stacking here is probably going to want to spin his web. Now, he can't do it this turn because he moved and he's going to attack, but he could do it the next turn. Of course, I'm the same person, so I know that this potentially could be happening, and therefore, I'm going to move away. So this is where, people who say, oh, you just play both sides of something, I say, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? It does become, frankly, a little bit difficult to sort of figure that out and have it be, at least for me, any approximation of 2 different players' decisions, because clearly if there were 2, I think, and this was the situation, you would know, well, perhaps there's web spinning going to happen. bearing in mind, of course, at the beginning of the game, you don't necessarily even know this fellow has web spinning. So, you just sort of figure it out. Obviously, this whole thing is a fantasy game and it doesn't really matter. I definitely have a priority on the monster side to try to do the web spinning when he can. But of course, I know in my mind that that's going to be happening. So, such as it is, just probably too much time spent on this one little scenario, but that is where things stand. And since we're here, we'll show you what happens. So on 2 to 1, this monster, find a place to roll this d6. He's rolling a 5. He seems to roll 5s. That's going to be probably good for him. I think we have to retreat one. Let's go back to the CRT here. We are now the defender. Yes, on a 2 to 1 again. We're going to retreat. The effects on the units. Surviving units must retreat 1 box. And let's see, it looks like we have an elimination as well. Excuse me, I did not do that. So I need to correct that, because from before I noticed that the monster did suffer 1 damage point as well as retreat. So I'll correct that. And also it looks like one of my units is going to be eliminated and the surviving units are going to have to retreat. So that kind of stinks. So we lost this guy, and now you can start to see how this game can go south pretty quickly. So this fellow is gone as far as I can tell. And these 2 tanks are going to need to retreat 1 box. I think I will just move them back here, doesn't really matter, and go back and make that correction to the other part. Well, it is clear that I really enjoy this game, and one of the things that is cool about it from my perspective as a parent is that it is a way of exposing kids to some different types of game mechanics, some war game mechanics, in a way that may be more approachable to them and more inviting to them than some type of historical simulation. At least my kids. I mean, obviously everybody's different, but I do enjoy it for that. It is possible to play it solo with some hand-wringing if you're me and try to take these things really too seriously, I guess, but it's possible to do that, and it conveys that sort of B-movie horror, sci-fi, monster rising up from the dead sort of feel very effectively. The fact that you have helicopters coming in is nicely three-dimensional. The fact that there's fire and wind spreading, all that kind of stuff. I will warn you that typically in terms of the victory points, at least for me, I get caught up by the rubble that ensues from fire spreading, and you just don't have enough firemen to put them out. So maybe that's pretty realistic too. The monster usually wins. Maybe that's pretty, quote unquote realistic too. And I don't know how hard this is to get or not. I obtained this in a trade and got a really nice condition copy of the game. If you like the sci-fi theme, the B-movie theme, if any part of this video struck your fancy, I think it would be worth seeking this one out. Thanks for watching.